All right, I want to take you from being a beat reporter at City Hall, or it could have been the police beat or whatever, to being a columnist who can write anything about anything. What's that day like?
That day is a lot different. That day starts with a lot of stress and often ends with a lot of stress because, to me, a columnist needs to be coming up with something that people want to read. You have to be self-starting, and it has to be interesting every day. And usually, it's got to be an opinion people aren't thinking about, which is a tough place to start your day from.
How many words in your column?
They were 650 to 700.
How many days a week did you write it?
I wrote one column a week, generally for The Sun, and then I also wrote a couple editorials and edited the whole section.
All right, what do you do when the old clock on the wall is getting near deadline and you don't have your 650 words? Are there any tricks to getting inspiration or making the most out of the perspiration?
I think one of the tricks is you go to Old Faithful. You go to call some of your sources, you call some of the people who have always been there for you and you know you can get a story from them. And you generally, I think, tend to fall back to what you really know well. If the clock is ticking, you're not going to go somewhere new. You're going to somewhere safe and comfortable where you think, I haven't quite tackled this element of why the government built a retractable roof stadium downtown, but I still have it in my back pocket.
Now, people, when they deal with a columnist, are going to get an opinion in addition to coverage of something, and they should know that, right? That's your mandate.
Yes, they should.
How do you pitch a columnist safely, or maybe you don't? Maybe I should start before that question, should you pitch a columnist? But if your answer is yes or maybe, how do you do it safely? And you simply have to trade off, I'm going to get my name or my issue in the paper, but I might get a poke in the eye on the way by.
I think you need to know the columnist if you're going to pitch a specific columnist. If you're going to pitch the right-wing columnist who is strident on where he or she is about never spending any money, and you have a new project that costs a lot of money, expect to get kicked in the teeth. But if you're pitching a column to someone who is more sympathetic, you might have a better chance at getting the spin you want. That said, when you throw it in front of a columnist, you have no idea where it's going to come out, where they're going to come out. It's a little safer going to a news reporter, but these days, people aren't doing things that are just straight anymore. It's really interesting that transparency is the new way of the world. It isn't unbiased, it's transparent.
As Michael Corleone in The Godfather said, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. If you know you're going to get a poke in the eye from this columnist, or if you know this columnist is against your issue, are you better off at least trying to soften him or her up, or put irrefutable facts in front of that person to dampen their enthusiasm for criticizing you?
I would say 95% of the time, yes, that you do want to at least talk and try to explain your position, especially if you're confident in it. If you know what you're doing, you absolutely should be talking to that columnist and saying, yes, I understand your point of view, but have you considered these 3 points? This is why we're doing it. This is why we're proud of it. This is why we stand behind it. There are always going to be some columnists who have made up their mind before they get out of bed. When you hit one of those, sometimes you just say, you know what, I'm just going to let that audience go, especially if it's a big issue. If, let's say you're doing this in Toronto, where there are 4 big daily papers every day, plus TV, plus radio, plus the internet, you might be able to just say, you know what, I'm going to let that person's column go. I'm going to focus on elsewhere.
Do you write these people a letter after the fact, not exactly dotting the I's and crossing the T's or correcting each line, but just your own perspective? Had you thought of this? I wonder if you'd considered the other aspects of this besides what you just wrote about. Does that do you any good?
I would say no, because generally the stress these columnists are under, they've moved on, they probably don't remember your name the next morning. So I would say if there's something you felt you really got a unfair shake on, you can write a letter to the editor, you can handle it in a different way. Usually, not always, there's always exceptions, but I think generally a columnist who is writing 3 columns a week, they write the column the one day and they move on and they're on the next topic unless it's something big and they're going to get a couple columns out of it.
Some of the most memorable things in newspapers that I bet you and I could share over a drink or something would be editorial cartoons.
Yes.
Now, I've never heard a public affairs person have a strategy on how to influence an editorial cartoonist. I noticed that you weren't one, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Editorial cartoonists take a story and make it fantastic in one picture. You can't touch them though. They are so smart and so independent and have such a great take on everything. Generally what you do, and it's interesting, the Mayor of Toronto right now, what he does is he just takes it, pulls it out of the paper, frames it and puts it on his wall. Positive, negative, whatever, because they just live in a different world. And yeah, oftentimes, you know, it can set the tone for coverage, but oftentimes it's just there for fun.
Well, that's what Mel Lastman used to do, another colorful mayor, covered the wall.
Yes.
And after he got all 4 walls covered, I guess he left politics because he had lots of editorial cartoons. But some of them are even libelous. The famous Bill Vander Zalm pulling the wings off a fly case. If you know you're going to get caricatured in a witty way and it's going to make you a little more famous and more of a character, that's great. But if it's really damaging, does anybody write letters to editorial cartoonists, or do they send them background information or press kits to try to influence them?
I haven't seen that. I've seen letters to the editor about cartoons, and you know, we ran one at the Toronto Sun before I became editor where it was sort of a color by numbers of the former mayor David Miller. And when you colored the numbers, it became a very unflattering picture with sort of a Hitler-type mustache on the mayor. And the mayor was quite upset about it. And he wrote to the Sun, and the Sun actually wrote a column apologizing to the mayor that that one should not have got through. And one of the things that you need to know is that editorial cartoonists live on the edge. They're only good as if they live on that edge. Sometimes they go over.
But I'm sure that the mayor in question, Miller,
Yes.
would have received the advice that I might have given him, I at least would have put it on the table. You know you're going to draw more attention to this. All kinds of people don't pull out their crayons and color because the newspaper suggested they do so. All kinds of people didn't see the editorial cartoon that day. All kinds of people didn't even read the newspaper that day. So dubious strategy, eh?
It is a dubious strategy. Sometimes it's just too much. And I think David Miller was probably right to call the Sun on that one. And you know, the former editor, he said that was one of the regrets that he let that piece go through.